before I became a YouTuber. I still hate calling myself that. I never thought of myself as a YouTuber. But before I started putting stuff on YouTube, I used to draw comics, indie comics, and then, you know, I've done some comic book covers. But my real first crack at comics was through an indie comic called Until We Sleep. I might be able to link it in the description if the website's still there, but it was under a company called UWS Comics. I did 3 issues, and there's about 12 or 13 that actually made it out. I ended up leaving because I wanted to do more of my own thing. Those guys are all great, have no problem with them. But that's where I learned the basics of kind of putting together characters. And since I was a kid, I've been working on Midnight Eye. So you're going to see actually in this video that's going to be playing either around me is one of my characters from Midnight Eye. This one is called Thorn. And in my comic, she is an agent of the Vatican. So I don't want to give too much away because she is not really introduced yet. She will be introduced in later comics, but that's another thing I'll talk about later in the video. Some of the things that I learned was to kind of craft the story. So Midnight Eye was like my baby since I was a kid. So what I did is I took what I learned from there and started really crafting Midnight Eye. So I've been writing it out. So far I have about 8 chapters written out. And now there's 3 available on Webtoons, and then the 4th one is being worked on as we speak. One of the things I wanted to break down was it's really complicated to create a world. A lot of the younger kids will probably call it lore building, but you know, growing up we called it world building. And you know, whenever you hang out with other creatives, you kind of pick up things from other people. So that was one of the things that I always try to pick up from other classmates and later on other adults is, you know, different personalities. And so in my story, I use personalities of people that I actually knew in real life and sprinkle them into the characters. There's still an overarching story, and I used a lot of what I learned from The Hero's Journey, which is a really great book. It kind of shows you the 12 steps of the hero's journey. And if you actually watch Star Wars, it really follows that recipe. So I learned a lot about that, and you know, reading old mythology, Greek mythology, Norse mythology. I have read parts of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's kind of hard. It's kind of a hard read, but Greek mythology is so much fun. And you know, that's where I got the sprinkles of the idea. But all throughout history, humans have always talked about gods. And I wanted to go one step further. What if there's a species that's above gods? And so that's what Midnight Eye is about. But once I had that basic, you know, structure for the story, I had to come up with interesting characters. So that's part of the reason why I started using people's personalities that I know in real life. So, you know, a lot of people who are probably watching this, they're based on different characters in the story. A good example is one of the characters that is kind of a rival to my main character. I based him on my cousin Alex, who is the one that kind of taught me martial arts, or, you know, really got me really into it. So there's, you know, analogs for Bruce Lee, but then I also use historical aspects. Thorn, who I still haven't figured out where I'm going to put it in the video, but it's going to be showing. Thorn is pretty much kind of based on my daughter's mannerisms. The way she, you know, her attitude. And my kids' attitudes, I kind of have to take responsibility for that one. But I have a lot of fun giving the characters, you know, personalities of people that I know in real life. Another big thing was to create a story that felt like I wasn't copying somebody else. I noticed that it's really hard to find original stories out there. So I remember in high school, people were like looking at like the first version and they said, oh, it kind of reminds me of this or this. And I was just like, I'm going to have to scrap and start from the beginning. So that's what I did. after high school, and doing some comics, I started rewriting the story and making it more original. So there's sprinkles of things, and that's another thing. I sprinkled a lot of the influences that I've ever had. So like there's a little sprinkle of TMNT, there's a sprinkle of Dragon Ball, Game of Death, which I still think the original version that Bruce Lee had in mind probably would have been his magnum opus, and I'm kind of bummed out we never got to see what he had in mind. We got to see the last fight scene that he wanted because of the director's cut like snippet, but we never got to see the whole movie. And Game of Death sticks in my mind. And then movies from Takeshi Mike. I'm not totally sure how to say his name, but I started watching his movies from like Audition, Dead or Alive, Dead or Alive 2, and then Ichi the Killer. So those movies really kind of like a new rebirth. And for example, and spoiler alert if no one's watched it, Dead or Alive is a gangster movie about a cop and a gangster kind of going at odds. But at the end of the movie, it turns into an episode of Dragon Ball Z. Like, I'll just leave it at that. I think you can just find the ending on YouTube. I might be able to find it and link it in the description. But those movies really inspired me to make something different. And so Midnight Eye, if you guys haven't checked it out, it's on Webtoons and it's free. So on there, if you read the comic, you can see the influences that I have with a lot of things that I grew up with, things that I love out there, video games. For example, my character Damascus, which is kind of like my analog for Death, but I never call him that. He's heavily inspired by Dracula from Castlevania, not the regular Dracula. So that's all those influences that I have. So those are kind of like my big ideas for you if you want to create a world and world build. Is a good idea is to get a pack of index cards and even sticky notes, and buy one of those cork boards from Five Below, or even the Dollar Tree. It doesn't have to be something super expensive, and you start mapping out your story. So in the center you can just write, this is my story, name of story, character names, and what you want to accomplish. And then with a clock formation, you could start from what would be 11 o'clock, and then from there you could do like, this is where you want your story to start, and then the little arcs. And so if you do it that way, it's just so much easier to, if you're a writer, to write it down. I personally like to sketch out everything, and then I work the dialogue in. I know that's kind of backwards, but I learned it from my friend in the comic industry, Larry Hama, and he used to work on G.I. Joe, and he said that's how he did it. And I was like, this might be easier for me, because I don't know about you, but I'm an artist, I'm not a writer, so it's hard for me to sit there in front of a word pad and type stuff out. So it was so much easier to just kind of sketch what I wanted and then work the dialogue in. So Midnight Eye 4 to 8 is pretty much that. It's just, I wrote the story out, and then there's little chunks of panels all strewn about. So that way it would work, and since my story kind of goes back and forth in time, it allows me to kind of move them around, shuffle them like dominoes, and it still works, at least for me. And that's the thing too, is you gotta have fun with it, and you gotta enjoy it. If you don't enjoy your story, it's gonna be a chore to go into it and work on it. You have to really enjoy what you're doing, so that way you can go back to it and make it like your second job, or if you work 2 jobs, your third job. Or if you're a stay-at-home dad like I was for a long time, just work when you got the kids and they're well occupied. So I would recommend that, story planning and character development. Another thing that helped a lot if you have trouble creating scenes is to watch movies that you really enjoy and pausing them on shots that you really think will work for your comic or your story. And don't copy them, but just look at how it's framed and then create a quick storyboard. And what makes storyboards so great is that you can just jot down an idea. I did a storyboard once for a indie movie here in Rochester, and the script was so very detailed, but I knew for every scene I wanted to make something where I got the idea right away. So if it said guy walking down the alley, I would just draw 2 lines to signify the alley, sketch out shadow for the person, and maybe a focal point or show where the camera would be, and if it's night or day. And what that does is that you could save it for later. The iPad makes it so easy now to like sketch something and then throw it in your photos, and you can go back to it. So that's my recommendation if you can't figure out shots, or if you're just not a comic person, if you just like movies. Some people who like movies really want to make stories, and I always say the best way to do it is just to study from the masters, like watching Scorsese films. He has a really good eye for shots, and some of those shots work really well in comics. Even Quentin Tarantino, I know he's kind of soured people throughout the years, but he's a big fan of Japanese movies and anime, and you can see that in his movies. He takes a lot from Eastern cinema, and now things like Dan takes those movies, and so it's full cycle. Just like comics were co-opted in Japan, and then Japan made anime, and now comics here are trying to do anime. So it's just full circle. That's why I'm a big proponent about leaving the world as one big thing. Country lines shouldn't exist. Everybody's beautiful in some way, and we should all kind of unify. Because when we unify, just like United States, we got so many different people here, and when we work together, we make awesome things. And I feel that's the same way with creatives. I think if we pick from little things, we can really have fun. And going back to Midnight Eye, that was what my big thing was, is I'm taking from all these mythologies, I'm taking from all this more source material, but I'm giving it my own little twist, and I want to honor those things in the world. So that way, if a kid in Iraq picks up or reads this webtoon, they can see that they're being represented just like a kid in Japan or a kid in Alabama. Everyone's going to have something to look forward to, and that's another thing that I recommend for you writers and comic book people. I never say aspiring, because as long as you start, you're a creator. So even if you just have notes in your sketchbook, or jot stuff down in a journal, once you start that path, it's not aspiring anymore. You already started. So keep on going with it, because you're gonna create something really cool someday. And even if you don't, you still created something. And so I never like using aspiring creators. Whenever I meet students or people out in the open and they tell me I'm aspiring, I'm like, no, you're an artist, you're a writer, you're a music producer. Because when you have that mindset that you can already create, sky's the limit. So enough rambling. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I want to make it more of a thing. Next time I want to go into how I kind of craft characters. I only kind of breeze the surface on my characters, but I want to show like how I kind of create, how I pick names, what abilities I give them, because abilities have been super played out at this point. Everybody has a Superman, everybody has a Batman, but if you give it a little twist, I think that's what's going to really make your story or movie or comic stand out. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy the art, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe. I am the Art Sensei. Don't forget to keep it over 9,000. Take care.